reached almost the conclusion of our course on Indian knowledge systems and the Indian web of art and aesthetics. And to conclude this course, we have two talks today and tomorrow with Professor Bharat Gupta, who is a well-known exponent of Indian art and aesthetics, in fact, so it is a very apt conclusion to this course when we've had so many renowned speakers and deep scholars in the fields of Indian art and aesthetics. In fact, Bharatji is going to speak on Indian theatre, drama, today and tomorrow. And it is very good that we were able to include drama, because we've had Professor Srinivas Reddy speaking on music, Dr. Padma Subramaniam on Indian dance, Nandita Krishna on painting. We had our own Dr. V.N. Prabhakar on Indian architecture, and drama was certainly missing. Though it is, of course, there is an intersection with dance and music, as we know. Nevertheless, I believe out of all Indian arts, it is perhaps the one which is most underrepresented today and most poorly known, perhaps, among the general Indian audience. So it's a great pleasure to have you, Bharatji, and I should confess that we've been old friends and acquaintances for well over 2 decades, and I'm delighted that you could join us. You were supposed to join us in the first edition of this course in 2016, but could not for various reasons, and I'm glad that you made it at last. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Namaskar to everybody, welcome everybody. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Today I'm going to talk about Indian theatre, or rather ancient Indian theatre, and how it developed through the centuries, right down to the present day. Fortunately, it is not just ancient or classical theatre in this part of the world, but it is still a living tradition. And it has been drawing from its very, very hoary past and developing and changing to take the new styles and forms as we find them today. So I'll talk about the whole of Indian theatre, but more or less I'm going to talk about its foundations as are found in the famous text written by Bharat Muni called the Natya Shastra. You see, the plays, the ancient plays of Kalidasa, Bhasa, and several other playwrights that survive today, they are perhaps not more than 2,000-year-old or maybe 21 or 2,200-year-old. But there was a theatre and a highly developed form of theatre much before that. And how do we know about this? We know about this very conclusively and in a great detail from this text called the Natya Shastra. Now, the Natya Shastra is commonly said to have been composed or compiled between 200 BC to 200 AD. Now, this statement you find ad nauseum in almost every book on Natya Shastra. And to this day, I have not found anybody giving a reason for it. So even great scholars like Kapila Vatsyayan or V. Raghavan of Chennai, all these people have just somehow or the other simply mentioned this date and passed over the whole issue. Nobody has seriously, except a couple people who have explored as to why the Natya Shastra should be much older than this. Now, we all know that the present Natya Shastra, which consists of 6,000 verses, is a later version of an earlier Natya Shastra. Just as there is a Bharat Muni who wrote this or compiled this collection of 6,000 verses called Shat Sahasri, there was a senior Bharata or Vriddha Bharata who composed or compiled a text of 12,000 verses. So this text is half of the older text. Now this is incontestable because this is found in many ancient references, and scholars agree on this. They don't think this is a fiction. Now if this is the truth, then obviously this text is a development from an earlier text. And we know that there were much earlier texts than this. Then the text of Bharat Muni, texts which are lost today, we know the names of those like Natya Sutras, like the writings of Shilali and some others, which don't survive but which somehow contributed to the formation of this text. It is from this text that we get to know what was ancient theatre. So this 6,000 verses text gives us a complete detail in 36 chapters of how actually theatre was performed. You see, theatre is not a written play. It's not just a script of a play or a series of dialogues which now comes before you in a printed form and which used to be once in a manuscript form, something written by a poet or a playwright. A theatrical performance is a very practical thing. It consists of so many kinds of activities like acting, dancing, music, reading out the text, speaking the dialogue, making all kinds of backstage arrangements, and above all, a theatre house in which it is played. So, a real performance, a theatre performance, is dependent upon all these things together. It is not just dependent on what the playwright has written. Also, it is not as if everybody is looking to the playwright that, okay, please give me a script and we'll perform. As a matter of fact, the playwright would be writing something for a performing tradition. So Natya Shastra, which consists of two crucial words, Natya and Shastra. Natya is the art. The art which a nut practices. That is, in which through his or her body, he or she performs things. And this performance consists of all kinds of constituents. So, in the Indian tradition, whatever the nata or the abhineta or the actor or the player does on the stage is natya, is theatre. And he or she is the fulcrum of that performance. The player produces drama, and along with other players produces a performance. Now there are certain rules for that performance, certain expectations of that performance, certain conventions of that performance, and they make up what is called a Shastra. Shastra has been defined as a discipline. Kimiti Shastram, what is a Shastra? Shasanopayam. How you undergo the discipline of performing a particular art. Here it is the art of performance, Natya Shastra. Somewhere else it may be the art of desire or Kama Shastra. Or it may be Yoga Shastra. So the living practice is yoga, and the discipline around it, the method to teach it, preserve it, transmit it, write about, think about is the Shastra. Similarly, the Natya Shastra. Now there is a common misconception about Shastra, that Shastra lays down certain rules And all those who are performing have to stick to those rules. Now this is exactly the opposite of what the Indian tradition talks about, or even the Natya Shastra talks about. A Shastra describes how a particular art is practiced. It is not prescriptive. It is, on the contrary, it is descriptive. That this and this and this is the way that great players are performing. This is how they are doing this art. This is how they are communicating with others. And I have given you a description of what they are doing. And those who come after me, says Bharat Muni, when they see some new things, then they will describe those things and incorporate them into this Shastra, into this discipline. The last line of Natya Shastra is, I have given you an extensive description of how this art is performed. But if you see something new, if you see something else being done now, please include it into the body of this text. So, Shastra is not disciplinarian in the sense of enforcing anything, but it preserves and opens up a lot of room for innovation. Now, this is about the general art and how to manage that art, the art of theatre, and how you are in principle going to manage this art by a Shastra. Now let us go into something of history, and you know in India history is always combined with stories, which is pejoratively called myth or mythology. So let me go to the story of how Natya Shastra was born. What is the Utpatti? You see, most Shastras, most classical texts, including the Smritis, etc., they always start with the reason for their origin and the story of their origin, how they came to be born and why and where and how they grew up and how they expanded. So they think of a text as a living thing. So Natya Shastra was born when Indra said that he wants to see a new art form in which he can see and hear at the same time. He says, I want something which pleases me. Kridaniyakam ichhamo. I need a kridaniyak, something to delight me. But yat shravyam cha drishyam bhavet. That which can be seen and heard at the same time. So he is actually asking for a new form. Because painting can be seen, music can be heard, sculpture can be seen or touched, but you can't see and hear anything at the same time. Yugapat, same time. He asks for this, and so this is the great distinction that theatre, drama, Natya has from all other arts. And in this way, Natya becomes inclusive of all arts. When Indra makes this request to Brahma, Brahma pleases him by creating Natya. But Indra also asked something else. Now this is very important. He said that, look, people are not following the path of dharma as rigorously and as righteously as they should anymore. So why don't you create something which keeps them on the path of dharma and something which gives them education? He says, Indra says himself that the Vedas are not available to everybody. The higher forms of education are not available to the largest number of people. So give us something which is able to give the knowledge, the highest knowledge, the knowledge of the Vedas to everybody. Not just the common man, but to everybody, whosoever exists, high, medium and low, Uttam, Madhyam, Adham. Everybody should be able to get that highest knowledge or the summum bonum. So, Brahma says, fine, I will give you a new art form, and this art form would also be the fifth Veda, Panchama Veda. So you have the four Vedas, Rig, Sam, Yajush and Atharva, and now this will be created out of all these four and will be the fifth Veda. So Natya Shastra is the first text which was called the fifth Veda. Later on, Mahabharata was also given that kind of a status because it was huge and big. But Mahabharata only follows what was the example set by Natya Shastra and the Natya. Now, many people say that, look, this looks like a Brahminical plot to elevate the status of the art, the status of theatre. And theatre must have been performed by common people and ordinary people, and probably by non-Aryans, we have those theories also. So the Brahmins appropriated the whole thing and they said that, look, this is something born out of the Vedas. Okay, fair enough. Questions have to be asked. But if you look very closely as to how theatre was actually performed and how the earliest theatre, all the techniques of earliest theatre as described in the Natya Shastra, how they were brought before the people, then you will see that it had an extreme closeness with all the four Vedic rituals. You see, Vedas are not just a collection of mantras, lexical collection. The Vedic ritual was yajna, it was a very practical thing. The Vedas were not composed that one day Western Indologists will come and do research on it and will call themselves Vedicists. So Vedas were not created for the Vedicists. They were created for worship. They were created for inviting gods, for performing yajna, and for giving all the things that they asked, that they were capable of giving to the people. So they were practical worship. Now if you see the rituals of the worship which were done in the yajna, the Natya Shastra is very close. Natya Shastra says itself very clearly, Jagraha Pathyam Rigveda, that I took Natya was created by taking the text from Rigveda. Now, one has to understand this a little deeply. Preservation of the text, memorizing of the text, not allowing the text to be corrupted, this was a massive, intricate technology in ancient Vedic times. A single mantra was learnt. Every mantra was learnt in 8 forms. Ashtavikriti, so that it is preserved. There are 8 sections of people who are learning it. And when they preserve the text of Rig Veda, as every Indologist would agree, even in the far west they would agree, that the text of Rig Veda after, 5,000, 10,000, whatever years is still the same. So, emphasis on preserving the text and using the text for music, for ritual, for yajna, or for anything else, this was the great technology of Rig Veda. That's why Jagraha Pathyam Rig Veda, that Pathya or text was taken from the Rig Veda, or rather the technology of preserving the text. Then Sam Ved provided the music, because as you know that Rig part was only in 3 tones, Pavakana, Saraswati, Vaje, Virvajni, just 3 tones. But Sam was in all 7 tones. So these 7 tones, they provided a foundation for a big variety of notes and a foundation for development of what we later on called music. In ancient times, the word for music was not Sangeet but Gandharva. But Gandharva was not synonymous with Samgan. Samgan was done only for ritual purposes, but taking that whole musical foundation, taking that whole system of using the notes and then elaborating it further and making it available to the common people for their common purpose, for their love songs, for their songs of victory, for their songs of woe and joy. That was Gandharva. That was the Laukik music. So Laukik music emerged out of Samved, and that became part of Natya or theatre. So here again you have something practical. Similarly, rituals of movements, body movements. I don't have time to describe the various movements, but they were all part of the Yajna movement, which the Brahmana or the Subramanyam or any other priest out of the 8 priests who were conducting the Vedic Yajna would be performing. And that gestural activity became the foundation of body movement, gesture or kinesis as you call it today for theatre. So you see theatre developed out of that. And just as Ayurveda developed the concept of Rasa, that is a potent juice which was medicinal, which would alter your state of health and restore you to normalcy, swasthya, take away all pollution, take away all excesses, all doshas. Similarly, your chitta, your mind, your emotions would be elevated through Natya Rasa into a higher state of aesthetic experience. So this concept was taken from Atharva Veda. So you can see that here some very practical, sometimes entirely practical, sometimes conceptual things are taken from the 4 Vedas in the formation of the art of Natya or drama. So this is the foundation of the Vedic. Again, apart from the practical method of this performance, how things were performed, how somebody sang, how somebody spoke the dialogue, how somebody moved around on the stage or danced, there was another set of development that took place. When the first performance was given of theatre, it failed. Why did it fail? You see, the story goes on that Indra asked for this art. Brahma said, okay, have this art, have this 5th Veda, I've given you this knowledge, now put it to practice. The gods say we can't put it to practice because we are gods. We don't experience pain, we don't experience longing or death, so we can't talk about theatre, we can't talk about drama, which is a combination of pleasure and pain. So let a sage like Bharat Muni take this art and do a performance. And Bharat Muni does the performance. Bharat Muni does the performance and it fails. Because in the ashram of Bharat Muni there were no women. There were only men. And when men only performed a play, it was a total flop. So Brahma said that, look, it's not working. Bharat Muni said, give me beautiful apsaras, women. And apsaras were created and given to Bharat Muni. And when they joined, then theatre was a great success. Now this is a reference to the historical fact that right from the start, women were considered as essential for performance of drama. You see, this did not happen in, let's say, the great ancient Greek drama. There were no women. It was not part of the Christian theatre. Women did not appear on the Elizabethan stage. They came somewhere in the early 18th century, they came onto the stage, just about 400 years ago. But here they have been there for 2,500 years ago. So women came in and there was a lot of shringar, kaishiki vritti. In other words, erotic themes could be there. Then both Brahma and Bharat Muni went to Shiva to show their achievement. And to cut a long story short, Shiva said it's all fine, but it does not have something yet more essential, and that is dance. And he says, now Bharat Muni, I am going to ask a disciple of mine called Tandu to educate you in dance. And Tandu gave the knowledge of dance through Angaharas, Rechakas and Pindivandas. These are three things he gave them. Angaharas are certain postures fundamentally constituted by karanas. So how you hold the upper part of your body and the lower part of your body, it combines to make a karana. And then combinations of karanas make angaharas or different postures of the body. And this is how you hold your hands. These are called rechakas. How you move your belly, how you move your eyes, how you move your shins, your feet. So all these movements are rechakas. And this was the way dance was introduced into theatre. So you find step by step there is a growth of Indian theatre which is recorded in the Natya Shastra itself. If you look upon it, even from a point of view of a historian of theatre or a dramaturgist, somebody who knows the growth of drama or the art of drama, then you will see it is very clearly indicated there. That you have pathya, that you have gesture, that you have song, that you have the high aesthetic experience, then you have dance. And the various parts of the body take part in that dance. They become part. The dance extends to the whole of body, not just upper or lower part of the body. And this is how certain things develop. And then finally Pindivandas. Now this is something which scholars for a long time have totally overlooked. Recently I have published some extensive paper on Pindivandas, drawing attention to this aspect of Indian theatre. Now what was this Pindibandha? Pindibandha means then when you take the characteristics of a devata, of a god or a goddess, like Indra or Varuna or Shiva or Kartikeya or any other, and when you bring those characteristics into your body, and when you also show the vehicle of that god. So when a dancer is able to bring in a single posture, not in a dancing posture but in a standing posture, the shape of a god, whether it is Shiva or it is Ganesha, and those postures reflect that god. In other words, they have the weapon of that god, they have the face of that god, they have the posture of that god, they have the look of that god, they have the vehicle of that god, they portray that god. Then that is called Pindibandhas. And Pindivandas were enacted on the stage. Why? Because right from the start, theatre was supposed to be connected to divinities. That is why in the 4th chapter there is a whole detailed description of how this happens and why the Pindivandas were part of the preliminaries of theatre or Purvaranga. After seeing the Pindivandas, you went on to see the performance of a play, whether it was Abhigyan Shakuntalam or it was Mrichakatikam or whatever. So you could see the gods and the gods on the stage. And this is also incidentally the first account of gods becoming morphous or taking a shape, a beautiful shape. And this is the first example in Indian text, any Indian text, of a murti. So first the murti came into existence in the body of a actor, of a theatre person, of a performer. And then it was translated into another medium like stone or wood or this or that. So Natya Shastra also shows the connection with the Vedic gods and the later Murti Puja. And this is also connected with the idea of descent of the divine. Pindibandha is the descent of the divine on the stage, of avatar. And hence it is connected with the avatar of a Vishnu in the form of Ram and Krishna, and the stories of Ram and Krishna which become the fundamental stories for performances of Indian theatre. So you can find a whole development right from the earliest times described in the Natya Shastra in very practical terms of a performance, a practical art, not just theorizing, but you can see it. So Indian theatre therefore was a new art which combined all arts. That's why Brahma, in describing this art, said that there is no technique or device or art form on the face of earth which is not incorporated in Natya or theatre. Theatre has every kind of art in it, whether it is painting or it is sculpture or it is making things plastic or it is performing or singing or whatever. Everything is part of this art. Now, what is this art for? This art is going to, as was said by Indra, going to educate people. So it's not just for entertainment. It's not a time pass. You know, in the West, in the last 200 years, we have had many debates. Is art for education or instruction? Or is it for art's sake? Is it for pure aesthetic pleasure? And there have been a large number of people on both sides, and this is one of the major controversies in Western world of aesthetics. In India, it never existed. Because right in the beginning, the purpose of theatre was to educate, but it was not to educate by commanding. It was to educate by suggesting. It was to educate by showing what is called a character, or what the Greeks called the ethos. And so you would be given the idea of what is right, the notion, the Vedic notion of what is Rita or the truth, what is Purushartha, the 4 Purusharthas, Dharma, Artha, Kam, Moksha, for which you live, what is the purpose of your life, and also karma, above all, the consequence of your action. Natya Shastra again has a story on karma. The asuras, when they saw a play, they came around and destroyed the theatre house. They attacked the players. And when Brahma said, why are you doing this? Why are you so much anti-art? Why don't you allow what in our modern times our liberals would call freedom of expression? So he said, because you showed that we were defeated by the gods. So you are partisan Brahma. You are father to both of us, but you are partisan. You are against us. Brahma says, look, the purpose of Natya, the purpose of theatre is not to favor anybody. Theatre only shows the consequence of karma. It portrays the karmas, the actions, and then it also shows the consequence of those actions. So those who do desirable, good, creative actions, they achieve happiness. Those who don't, they achieve suffering. And we are only showing your defeat because you are not doing good action. If you do good action, we show that also. And wherever you have acted good, we have shown that also. So the struggle between the right of the performer to speak out and then the need for protection of that right is crucial to the story of Natya Shastra. It is there in the very first chapter, Utpatti Adhyaya. Now to continue what I was saying, that there are certain values in which I mentioned karma along with Rita, Purushartha, etc. Fundamental Vedic values. These are the values that theatre is going to show. How will theatre show that? How will theatre talk about these things? Not in a moralistic way, not through some kind of a catechism. No, it's going to show character. It is going to talk about great people. It is going to show the action, the story, the life story of certain characters. And so there will be stories of different people from different sections of society. You know, Greek theatre had tragedy, comedy and satyricon or satire. Only 3 forms. In India, we had 10 forms of theatre. So, plays like Nataka, they were reserved for royal, portraying the life of kings. Then another form was reserved for showing the life of rich business people. Then there were forms which showed how the gods and the anti-gods acted in heaven or in the netherworld. So that was yet another form called Samavakar. Then how there were fights between gods, that was also portrayed. Then how there was a fight between a Rakshasa and a human being. That was another area of portrayal. So there were 10 plays in all, and they covered whatever is to be found not just on the earth but the 3 worlds. You see, the ancient people, ancient Indians, and also the ancient Greeks and various other cultures, they believed that there was an upper world and a lower world. Whether it is true or not, that's not our concern. But they believed that there was a higher world where the gods lived, and there was a lower world where the lowly creatures lived. So, when you talk of the cosmos, you are going to talk of the 3 worlds. And when you are going to portray action, then you are going to portray action of all the 3 worlds and the creatures of the world. So there will be stories about gods, about human beings, and about people of the underworld. And the 10 stories, the 10 genres of Indian theatre, they talked about all of them. So there was Natak, there was Prakaran, there was Samavakar, there was Ihamriga, there was Dim, then there was Vyayoga, and then there was satire, Prahasan, in which people were made fun of. Who were the people who were made fun of? Well, Brahmins who pretended to be learned but were duffers, or all kinds of religious charlatans. There was a whole genre reserved for them. So it's not true that nobody could criticize the Brahmins in ancient India. Prahasan, which was a very, very popular art form, was devoted to just talking about charlatans. Then there was stand-up comedy. Then there was another stand-up comedy called Vithi. And then there was a ninth form which portrayed the prodigals who wasted their money, visited courtesans, threw around the money, hard-earned money of their parents. And finally, the 10th was Anka, which showed the horrors of war. What is the consequence of a war? How men, women, children suffer, how they are rendered homeless, how societies burn. These were the 10 genres. So ancient Indian theatre had a very, very wide canvas of representation. Now these ancient forms were really there, they existed, and around 2nd or 3rd century some of those forms disappeared. You see, Natya Shastra is a text which I have dated the present Natya Shastra to 5th century BC. The original Natya Shastra must have been another 500 or 600 years earlier, and the pre-Natya Shastra text, they were perhaps written soon after the Vedic rituals, the age of Vedic ritual. So it's a gradual development, and Natya Shastra as it stands today is 5th century BC, because it has no mention of temples, it has no mention of various other forms of worship and life which we associate with so-called classical India. So Natya Shastra is almost a pre-classical age text. When you read through it, you can find it. And there are so many other rituals, I don't have time to go into them, and many kinds of music and musical performances mentioned there, like Dhruva Gan, etc., which were purely out of the Vedic lore and Vedic practices. So all this goes on to show that it had a very, very close connection with the age of sacrifice or the age of yajna. Now this is the general view of Natya Shastra. This was performed from very early times in ancient India till the arrival of Islam. Now with the arrival of Islam, it underwent a very great shock for the simple reason that the performing space of theatre was taken away. I mean, that's a historical fact. Most people don't want to talk about it, but this is the truth. Because theatre was performed in India, ancient India. Mostly it was performed as theatre festivals held in the city. So the city would hold a festival for 8 days or 10 days or 15 days. People would get together and organize it pretty much like they used to do in ancient Greece. And if you want to see more comparison with ancient Greek drama, then you can read my book, Dramatic Concepts, Greek and Indian, where I have shown in very great detail as to how were these things organized in both societies and how they were very similar in spirit. So ancient theatre was performed in the city by the people, and all sections of people contributed to it. So don't believe in this myth which many people, including the Marxists, all the time keep rubbing onto you, that it was a theatre of royal patronage, it was a feudal theatre, it was for the pleasure of kings and queens and the upper royalty. No. This theatre was people's theatre in the literal sense, not in the communist sense of people, but people That is all the people and all the society of ancient India, right from poor, right from. Now one final thing which I'll say, and then I'll stop and take your questions. The language of this theatre was only 5% Sanskrit. 95% of it was Prakrit. Various kinds of Prakrits like Shauraseni and Ballika and Udicya and Dakshinatya, Dramil, it was called Dramil. They were spoken by different characters, and all the music in that theatre was never in Sanskrit, except for the songs or shlokas sung by some people, a king or a minister or somebody, not even a queen. They were all in Prakrit. So all music was very Prakrit, very folk. So, well, I don't know if you should call it folk, but let's say it's common. And ancient theatre made no distinction between classical and folk, because everything that was used for performance in the village or on the street, it was incorporated in a theatrical performance. So this whole distinction between the classical and folk simply did not exist in ancient Indian theatre. This theatre was a very vibrant theatre till 11th, 12th century, but with the arrival of Islam, when all the audience was taken away because Islam could not allow performances in the city, you see, the Muslim kings could listen to music privately in their harems. But theatre is not an art which can be done privately. It has to be done in public. And as it was a forbidden art, Islam does not allow it, so it was lost to India. And in this aspect, the story was similar to what happened in Greece, just as the Christians wiped out classical theatre of Greece, Islam wiped out the classical theatre of India. So I'll take questions now. Feel free to follow the system of asking questions that you have.
So, Bharaji, first of all, many thanks. It was a wonderful expose of the whole gist of Indian theatre and its fundamental principles and origins, of course. You've put so much in a short span of time. It was extremely rich. I have to wonder and marvel at, that today we have a discipline called mass communication, and you can do a master's in mass communication, but it looks very much as if in ancient India, mass communication was practiced in every art and also in literature, and there was no degree attached to it.
Yeah.
But it was very skillfully and systematically practiced.
Yeah.
So
the definition of an actor in Natya Shastra is communicator. An actor is one who communicates. Yasmat prayogam nayate tasmat abhinaya smrita. The one abhinay, acting, is that which takes meaning from stage to the audience, that which communicates. So this is the art of communication. Become a looking lens or a prism for you to look upon ancient Indian history. Now that is something which we should simply give up. Because the moment you do it, you will not see the truth at all. So, theatre or Natya was a sacred art till the arrival of Islam. With the arrival of Islam, it becomes only a pleasurable art, a consumptive art, not a sacred art. So dance is no longer sacred, music is no longer sacred. On the contrary, according to most sections of Islam, it is forbidden, it is haram. So the whole art of performance was looked upon by the elite largely as a pleasurable thing, and pleasurable in terms of carnal satisfaction. So this attitude is very different from the ancient Indian attitude. You can see several of my videos on my news channel, on my YouTube channel on Kama Sutra. I have something like 40 hours, 45 hours of videos on it, giving in detail the life of ancient India, in which the arts were part of the life of the courtesan. And what was the intellectual perception of that? How eroticism was conceived in India at 4 levels: at the physical level, at the social level, at the aesthetic level, and at the highest spiritual level. And in my lectures you will find an exposition of all this, with theatre in its proper place, with the life of the courtesan or Shringar in its proper place. So this kind of gradation and this kind of whole unity which ancient India practiced right up to 10th century got totally distorted later. So now we have then all these complaints, like people like Wendy Doniger saying that Hindus have lost their perception of what was sexuality, and they should come and learn it from her.
So you have rightly mentioned that there is this mentality shift we are observing, due to which the participation of Indians in the art forms has significantly reduced over time.
Yeah.
Do you think that by any chance there is contribution of Islam's consideration of art forms as haram here playing any sort of role? Because India earlier was very much inclusive of all kinds of religions, and we were a subcontinent once upon a time where every single religion was wholeheartedly welcome. So do you think that Islam's ideologies have anyhow impacted this change in thought which we have as of now?
Well, a very delicate question, but I would say by and large no. You see, the engagement of Islam with Indian darshanas was purely confrontational. It was not communicative at all. It is with the advent of Christianity that Christianity starts studying Hinduism or Indian religions, and it starts reinterpreting them. So it is with Christianity that you have a refurbishing of ancient Hindu concepts, but not with Islam. And as far as the life of pleasure was concerned, life of pleasure is not haram in Islam. It's not forbidden either in this world or in the other world. I mean, sexuality is permitted to any extent in the Islamic practices in this world, and it is imagined to be given to you as a divine gift in the other world. So I don't think that we can accuse Islam of any Puritanism. Frankly, I don't see evidence of that. But Puritanism comes into India with 19th century Christianity or 18th century Christianity, because then the idea of what is enlightened and what is godly and what is pure, this is very different. And this is what caught hold of our education system, of our way of looking of ancient Indian society. So sometimes we think of ancient Indians as licentious people, as people of Khajuraho, where we don't understand that these were very serious tantric practices done under certain gurus and tantric tradition and Varmak tradition. They were not just for everybody to go and enjoy and gape at. And sometimes we go to the other extreme, where we think that the highest ideals of sacrifice, of brahmacharya, they are based on denial. Unfortunately, our Mahatma Ji had a lot to contribute to this kind of a syndrome, but I don't want to touch upon that today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pratyush. So we'll have one last question, and
Yeah.
the remaining questions we'll take them up in after tomorrow's lecture.
Certainly.
So this is from Sumit, who is asking, what bigger role did understanding the mind of the audience play in ancient theatre? So were theatre workers of ancient India interested in understanding the minds of the audience?
Yes, you see, the fundamental concept of Natya Shastra is that something has to go from the stage to the audience, and the audience, while watching it, have to manipulate on what is going on the stage. It has to be a constant interaction, and that is how this whole art form is conceived as. It's not one-sided affair. It's neither preaching, it is not performing. It is communicating, making sure that I have drawn you into me, and I have shown something exceptional to you. And then, more than exceptional, I have created a state of elevation in you as an audience, which is Rasa. The whole concept of Rasa is to elevate the audience from ordinary feeling. Because unless the audience gets emotionally elevated, there is no purpose of coming to theatre. All arts must alter you emotionally. They should also alter you intellectually by making you more accepting, by making you more sensitive, by going even beyond reason into perfect empathy regarding the feelings of others. So that a good theatre goer is not just looking for something new on theatre. He becomes or she becomes open to all kinds of experiences in life, sensitive. That's the whole concept of the aesthete, the rasika. The concept of the rasika is somebody who can appreciate what is being presented as a new prayog or a new experiment. So open-mindedness is a condition, and it is demanded. So this was the fundamental principle of art, that there should be an ability to alter the feelings and the minds of the audience, and the audience should also be able to impose certain limits on the performer. It's very different from what modern medium of communication or entertainment does today. Today you are splashed with something. You have no choice. It's just, you are overwhelmed with it. Whereas in the ancient system, you could control it there and then. So the 27th chapter has details on this, as to how the audience would influence the performance and how the performer would assess his ability to influence or to impact the audience. The 27th chapter has quite a few details on it. Not a very big chapter, but it has all the details. And there were competitions and judgment as to how somebody performed, whether it was right or wrong, and where he failed or where she the company succeeded, and there were social prizes, and so it was a well organized method of assessing performance.
So perhaps we are done with the questions for today. It's already 4:30 almost.
Yeah.
And so Bharaji, we will thank you once again very much, because you have skillfully performed your duty of marrying scholarship with something that is accessible to everyone and makes us understand the whole spirit of Indian theatre, which is exactly why we wanted you to speak today and tomorrow.
Yeah, for details, you can see my channel. It has about 70 to 80 hours of lectures on Natya Shastra. So for all the details, you can go into different lectures for chapter-wise details.
Numerous lectures.